Okay, so today it's time for a feel-good story, and believe me, this is going to be a good one, because I just found something and I loved it. And when I'll show it to you, I'm sure you'll do the same. But first things first, the bison, or buffalo as most of us call it, even though it's not the same species, is still widely seen as an emblematic American symbol. While it symbolizes freedom and vastness of a promised abundance in the American West, this highly romanticized animal looks back on a difficult past. And today, there are only a few pockets left where this iconic animal still roams free, sort of. But this is about to change. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Look at this. Just the mere look of this gives me joy. For the first time in nearly 150 years, these buffaloes were released into the absolute wild. And why does this mean so much? Well, this shows that the people, after so many decades, have started to understand the importance of this keystone species to the landscape and the environment that surrounds it. The king of the prairie is finally back where it belongs. You might say now, especially if you're American, that there are so many bisons living in several places across the US. And yes, it's true. But when I say for the first time in 150 years into the wild, I mean the real wild prairie. No fences, no parks, no ranges, no nothing. The wild. Of the total of approximately 500,000 bisons alive today, the vast majority is ranched. These are farmed bisons with traits of cattle. Only 20,000 still live on wild grassland, and all of them are fenced or restricted within some sort of parks or preserves. There are no longer any truly free-roaming bison on the North American grassland. So as you can see, it's not about protecting the bison itself. The species is no longer considered endangered. In fact, bison protection and conservation efforts are nothing new. They are deeply embedded into the reasons that made them disappear in the first place. And the cause lies in the past, as so often. So let's go back in time when approximately 30 to 60 million bison roamed across the United States and Canada, primarily in the Great Plains. It was like a black sea that covered the American grasslands. This was the original range of the buffalo, mapped out in 1889 by William Temple Hornaday, an American zoologist and conservationist at the US National Museum. It shows this vast ocean of animals, this great bison savanna spreading all over the continent. 30 to 60 million of them. But for all its imposing strength and sheer vastness in numbers, the bison turned out to be a vulnerable species, at least against a staggering force, the Euro-American conquests. With settlers moving westwards, a cultural change swept across the prairie, and with it a belief system to conquer a wild landscape and develop it. There was a constructed ideal, a noble goal at the time, depicted in all sorts of artworks and allegories of the period. It was the idea that the United States is destined to expand its dominion and spread values, beliefs, and the political system across the entire North American continent. Masking out all political implications from that time, and if you take a closer look at these artworks, you can discover a ubiquitous detail in most of the paintings. The development of a land with modern machines and bison being hunted, fleeing from their conquerors. Buffalo were hunted by the millions, but not only to settle and develop the land, also for economic reasons. There was a huge demand for their hides or skins, predominantly needed to make belts for modern machines. Hunters simply skinned off their hides and let them rest on the prairies to rot. The wasteland was so scattered with bones of buffalo that the entire prairie looked like a graveyard. And it culminated in this. A famous photograph of bison extermination, men standing on a gigantic pile of bison skulls, taken outside of Michigan Carbon Works in 1892. I can't wrap my head around this. The relation to the man on the front. The average grown-up man in 1890 was around 5.5 or 169 in centimeters. So this must have been a 28 feet or 8.5 meters high pile of buffalo bones. So in 1886, William T. Hornaday headed west on a mission for the Smithsonian Institute in search of bison. But he didn't find any. The sea of bison was gone. So he started working on this map, showing the ocean evaporation into a couple of scattered little puddles. The total population of wild bison plummeted to somewhere between 300 to 800 individuals. He started working on a plan to raise awareness and shout out for the protection of the species. He brought a couple of live bison to the zoo in Washington, D.C. Hornaday's plan worked. Being close to the animal and looking them into the eye changed minds on Capitol Hill. Congress decided to establish federally protected herds where they were left, in Yellowstone, Montana, and Oklahoma. Yellowstone National Park was the first one in America, and it was created above all to protect the only few wild buffalo left. The park started with only 23 individuals, and it has done its job well. So well, in fact, that throughout the 20th century, the herd consistently exceeded the number of 4,000 bison, a number large enough to provoke fears of overgrazing in the park. So the rangers had to create a firing squad to keep this number in check. What was left to fate, though, was the original North American grasslands. The European settlers recognized the potential of the rich soils of this land, some of the richest on the planet, and converted the entire prairie into agricultural crops. Soil depletion, droughts, and a totally fractured ecosystem were the inevitable consequences. Yet today, almost 150 years later, the tides turned. The demands to rebuild a vast shortgrass prairie and eventually restore the complex and productive grassland ecosystem replenished with its native species is stronger than ever, and bison were an integral part of these grasslands before they were abruptly removed from the Great Plains. They were a keystone species, an organism that helps define the entire ecosystem. Buffalo are the largest land animals on the American continent, and these gentle giants spent most of their time grazing. The wild bison herds that once roamed the prairies were so large in numbers that they could never stay in one area for long. So the plants of the prairies adapted to the periods of intense grazing. Bison typically only eat grass, so it allows a diversity of plants to flourish on the prairies around them. Their heavy, sharp hooves help to aerate the soil and slice up the vegetation, allowing it to decompose and regenerate faster. A long-term comparative study from Kansas State University showed that over 30 years on land grazed by bison, richness of native plant species doubled, but the presence of bison made the prairie ecosystem more resilient to drought. And since the early 2000s, conservationist organizations like American Prairie have been working to create a fully functioning prairie, complete with herds of bison roaming across the landscape and playing their historical ecological role. The task is not easy. While the American prairie population started with only 17 and are still in the hundreds, at least 5,000 bison would need to be able to roam freely across 450,000 fenceless acres. And Yellowstone plays an important role in this. Unlike their ranched cousins, which are mainly the result of 20th century attempts to cross bison with cattle, the Yellowstone animals are wild and genetically pure, descendants of the original herds, and the excess number of animals there can now, instead of being culled, serve a greater purpose. And you might say that in some areas cattle can actually be used to simulate the behavior of bison, and that's true, but there is a vast difference. Bison do so naturally. The way bison graze creates more forage, nutritious for the ecosystem, and in winter bison use their gigantic heads to clear away the snow and get the grass underneath. That allows extra sunlight and increased moisture and lush growth in spring. Apart from that, bison are much better in tolerating the extreme weathers of the American grasslands, which is extremely important during the high summer temperatures. While cattle seeks out the shady places and cool water of the creeks, eating and trampling vegetation on concentrated spots, bison just continue to graze. However, there are still hurdles and major challenges to overcome. The usual suspects of such endeavors, like land costs and conflict with local farmers. And these bison, they still have a lot to learn in their new home. Vital natural elements of the wild prairie, such as fires, are still absent, but will return with the naturalization of the land. And over time, they will have to start following ancient routes and rhythms of migration in order to find the new grass that keeps growing with the patterns of wildfires and rainstorms. But as I told you at the beginning of the video, this is a positive story, and that's because wildlife biologists are more than confident that these herds will eventually master the needs of the prairie again one day. So the first steps of the return and the signs of a truly wild prairie with its dominant megafauna are already here, and the hopes are staked even way higher. American Prairie's dream is that one day all their bison and the ones from the reservations and wildlife refuges nearby in the US and Canada may become a vast herd again, roaming across 3 million acres. A bit like in the old day when the bison truly was the cornerstone of the American West. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't yet, and see you next time.